Aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but with the support of a nuclear state, is proposed to be considered as their joint attack on Russia. Russia will also consider the possibility of using nuclear weapons when receiving reliable information about a massive launch of means of aerospace attack and their crossing of our state border. This includes strategic and tactical aircraft, as well as cruise missiles and drones, hypersonic and other delivery vehicles. Russia reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in case of aggression, including if the enemy using conventional weapons poses a critical threat.
So this morning, Putin issues a warning, Vladimir Putin in Russia, to the United States with a new nuclear doctrine. So this doctrine basically is saying that if they are struck with certain missiles, then they will have the right to retaliate with nuclear weapons. And I'm not like posting this so that you can be so fearful, but what I am posting it is so that you all will know that, listen, it's praying time. It's been praying time. And if you aren't praying or haven't been praying, you better pray like never before, because there are going to be some hard times that come on the United States like we ain't never ever seen. And y'all better get y'all mind on the right stuff. That's all I'm telling you.
So what we know is that Ukraine has now used US-made weapons, they're called ATACMS, to strike inside Russia for the first time since this conflict broke out. These are longer range weapons, but they only flew just over the border to about 75 miles inside Russia, to an area where Ukrainian troops are already operating. So it is in effect a zone of conflict, but still this is the very first use of these weapons over the border into Russia during this conflict. So the question is, how does Russia respond to this latest development? What we know is it comes on a day when Russia announced that President Vladimir Putin had signed off on changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine. These are changes that were discussed some months ago, but announced only today. And it allows Russia, under certain conditions, it says, to use nuclear weapons against another country. The timing is interesting. It just adds to the tensions that we're seeing and a sense that things are really ramping up between Russia and Ukraine, particularly before we see Donald Trump take office in the US in the early part of next year. Well, it actually doesn't change that much on the ground in terms of the conflict. Russia says that it shot down 5 of these missiles. It says the 6th one didn't do much damage. That's Russia's claims, at least. And they didn't go that far into Russian territory. On the ground, we can see Russia still making gains inside Ukraine. What this really is about is Russia and Ukraine starting to really get positioned to be in the best possible position, the strongest position for the reality that this war is heading towards a negotiation. Certainly, Donald Trump, the incoming US president, has indicated that's what he wants. So they're setting themselves up to be in that strongest position for the fact that talks are likely.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a new doctrine, lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. Let's get our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, to comment on that for us. He's in Kiev for us today. 1,000 days. You were there 1,000 days ago. This is a worrying development.
It is a worrying development to a degree. I have to say, Russia has always had fairly strict protocols over when they can or cannot use nuclear weapons. And if you take the most basic one, is where they're actually under threat of invasion. There's been much talk about lowering those thresholds, and it now appears down to whether they're actually being attacked. And this is, of course, is it saber-rattling? Well, you can't tell for certain. Certainly it's something that the Biden administration will have been weighing up and considering when they finally agreed to allow long-range weapons to be used against Russia by Ukraine into Russia itself. But they've limited it to one area, the Kursk area. And so it's not quite what the Ukrainian government wanted, but it is definitely, certainly Moscow is taking this way, as a ratcheting up of the ante, if you like, because they are now able to fire into Russia itself. I think the analysis has always been that there will be a lot of saber rattling from Russia, and there has been throughout this conflict, with Western powers at least arming the Ukrainian military. At the moment, it hasn't come to anything more than that, and of course we know that the various spy agencies keep a close eye on the nuclear facilities, the nuclear abilities of Russia, and if they start seeing weapons being moved, then you might have another analysis about exactly what it all means.
The dirty bomb itself or a nuclear weapon?
I spent a lot of time today talking about that. Let me just say, Russia would be making an incredibly serious mistake if we're to use a tactical nuclear weapon.
Putin has just authorized the use of nuclear weapons. The latest escalation in the Ukraine conflict in under 60 seconds. This decision follows the Biden administration's authorization for Ukraine to use non-nuclear long-range missiles within Russian territory. Russia can now consider nuclear strikes if attacked by a non-nuclear country supported by a nuclear power, such as Ukraine with Western backing. Experts warn the updated doctrine increases the risk of nuclear conflict, with Russia emphasizing the potential for NATO to be directly involved.
Russia says that US-made Attacker missiles have been fired onto their territory and warned it's an escalation. So what are these missiles? Well, they're a missile system which can fire at longer range and be harder to intercept. And Ukraine has been after these missiles for some time, but Washington has just relented and said that Ukraine can use them on Russian territory. The reason that's important is because Ukraine's been on the back foot militarily, and now they'll be able to strike behind Russian lines, target Russian troops who are building up, including some North Koreans who've come over to help, as well as arms depots and the like. So this does look like a significant step, but it won't change the course of the war. But will it escalate it? Could it lead to a conflict between the US and Russia? Well, that seems unlikely, because Russia doesn't want to get into a war with America, and America doesn't want to get into a war with Russia. So the likelihood is that despite some tough rhetoric, this won't necessarily lead to a major escalation in the conflict.
Vladimir Putin has a new warning for the United States after President Biden authorized Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the U.S. to strike inside Russia. Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell starts us off from Ukraine. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, George. Nuclear saber rattling from the Kremlin this morning, with Vladimir Putin appearing to threaten to use nuclear weapons if Ukraine fires American-made missiles into Russia. The Kremlin saying the doctrine was updated in response to what it calls the new situation. The new Russian policy essentially authorizes the use of nuclear weapons in response to what it calls, quotes, critical threats of aggression using conventional weapons. Now, remember, President Biden lifting restrictions on the Attacker ballistic missiles, which are, of course, conventional weapons, essentially allowing them to be fired into Russia. Putin has made nuclear threats before that have proved to be hollow. A senior Ukrainian military source telling me this is blackmail, but also warning nuclear weapons are a Pandora's box that shouldn't be opened. This move likely aimed as much at President-elect Trump, who's promising to end the war when he takes office, but it'll make that all the harder. Meanwhile, Russia again escalating attacks inside Ukraine, striking an apartment block in the north, killing 9, including a child. And for all the talk of peace plans, Ukraine today marking 1,000 days of Russia's devastating war with no end in sight. And just one final bit of breaking news. We're hearing that the Russians are reporting that Ukraine has now used these Attacker ballistic missiles. More on that later.
Yeah, it looks like an escalation is coming. Okay, Ian, thanks very much.
Alarming news today. Not only has Russia issued a nuclear threat, but they've lowered their threshold for a nuclear response after President Biden yesterday, for the first time, allowed Ukraine to use U.S. long-range missiles in Russia, which Russia has claimed to have shot down today. Ukraine used U.S. ATACMS missiles to strike Russian territory on Tuesday, November 19th. Russia said its forces shot down 5 of the 6 missiles, which were fired at a military facility. There was was no casualties or damage. Debris from one hit the facility, starting a fire that was quickly put out. For reference, here's a map showing the estimated max range of these missiles. Kremlin spokesperson told journalists that the changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine signed by President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday meant that the use of Western non-nuclear rockets by the armed forces of Ukraine against Russia can prompt a nuclear response. The changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine were unveiled several weeks ago, but only signed by Putin today, as officials in Moscow expressed anger at the US decision to allow ATACMS use on Russian territory. I post videos on geopolitics every day. Shoot me a follow for more.
Hello, YouTube. Please let me know in the comments below what you think about Vladimir Putin lowering the threshold for nuclear war. Do you think it was a good idea for Biden to tell Ukraine to go ahead and use the long missiles? And do you think it was okay for Putin to respond with nuclear war? Because we're one of the countries that have nukes. So in my opinion, I think it was wrong for Biden to tell Ukraine to do this, and Trump is trying to make peace with Russia so we don't go to war. But we will soon see war eventually, because now Russia's not playing and the nukes are going to start flying because of what Biden did. If Trump can go and reverse it, maybe we'll have a few more years of peace. But as it looks, no, we don't. So let me know in the comments below what you think of Biden's new move before he exits the White House.